When I read her bio, I was really intrigued by her current interests, and I just thought there was such alignment with what we're trying to do today. So I'm really excited to hear these remarks. Her current interests includes measuring change when organizations and systems implement the principles of trauma-informed care, the impact of toxic stress on the workforce. Gosh, you think that's a topic for us? The intersectionality between equity work and the impact of systematic oppression, and the impact of systematic oppression. And so, which seemed directly linked to her presentation today, where trauma-informed care, cultural responsiveness, and care coordination intersect. I give you Dr. Mandy Davis.
What I want you to do first, because I need you to relax, because we're going to have an hour, and those of you who know me know I do 8 hours. So I'm going to need you to join me in some play today. So what I really want you to do is just chat beside you with someone beside you about some of the most challenging behaviors that you hear about those that you're trying to help. So from providers or coordinators, just what are some of those challenging people don't show up, whatever that is, the most challenging behaviors you hear. Chat amongst your table. And then you have to listen for me to bring you back. All right, so my name is Mandy Davis. I'm the director of this thing called Traumainformed Oregon. The only important thing about any of that, as you all know, is just the website, because all of our resources are free and online, so access that as you would like. Here's a question I have. How many of you have heard me talk about trauma-informed care? Sweet, because I don't want to talk about trauma-informed care today. I really am going to ask you to play with me. So this title, right, is Where is Trauma-Informed Care, Cultural Responsivity, and Care Coordination Intersect? And I was like, I don't know. And so I really have sat all week being like, this is the work. I kind of want to go to the, not just what is trauma-informed care place. I'm ready to go to the next place. And I'm really excited when I look around and see former students and folks I work with, and those of you who've been doing this work for a long time, for us to maybe have this conversation in an hour. So I really want you to play. So here's the thing. I'm going to ask for a little grace from you, because I'm going to throw out a bunch of thoughts I have about this intersection. And we won't have time to sit and talk about it, but hopefully throughout the rest of the day you can kind of think about that and kind of put it all together. So I'm going to try to get to the end with some summary statement, but I may not, because it's chaos. Right? So out of the chaos, we'll see what happens. And maybe there'll be magic, and maybe there'll be mess, and we'll kind of keep working through it. So bear with me in this, because I'm not going to do my normal thing. I'm going to kind of throw out some stuff and throw out this other stuff, and then ask you all as experts in care coordination. The big question I have for you is, how can trauma-informed care help or assist or support care coordination? What is, kind of the why? What's the added glitter of trauma-informed care that might make it helpful? So as we go through, as I talk about these random thoughts I have, and if any of you have ever worked with me, you know my brain's all the time. So I'm going to share all that with you. Get ready. But as I'm talking today, be thinking about what is it that I'm saying that may have something to do with culture, equity, inclusivity. What am I saying have anything to do with care coordination, system change, et cetera? Okay, so can you kind of put a learner hat on and kind of hold on tight? Any linear type A folks, access your coping skills, right? Because it's not going to be pretty. All right, so let's jump in. So really quick, let's just remember what trauma-informed care is. Most important thing, as you all know, as you do the work and as you go out and do the work and people use the word trauma-informed care, has anybody heard about it recently? So one of the biggest things is we need to be good ambassadors of what it is and what it's not, right? So really important that we remember that trauma-informed care is an organizational systems change intervention. Okay, really important. Trauma-informed care is about changing organizations and systems and how they do the work, not changing individuals, families, and groups. That's called trauma-specific service, okay? So remember that I always say I want the DMV to be trauma-informed. I do not want the Department of Motor Vehicles to provide me therapeutic services. okay? One of the biggest things I'm talking about right now as a result of my students who have been doing environmental scans across the state is Social Security Administration buildings. I just throw that out because I hope one day somebody will hear it and go, yes, we'll do that, right? So thinking about those entities need to be trauma-informed. Those entities are likely not to provide direct service around trauma, okay? So remember, trauma-informed care, system organizational change. We're going to look at policies and procedures. We're going to talk significantly about workforce wellness, because toxic stress in our workforce is impacting our work, our ability to engage, and it is our retention rates and our wellness in our workforce are not good. Not good, especially in healthcare, correctional officers, it's just not good. So we really want to attend to that, because if we can't keep you on the job in a healthy way, then all those great best practices we know work are not going to happen, right? They're just not going to happen. All right. So again, just setting the stage, a reminder for those of you who haven't heard me before, is kind of what is trauma, right? So trauma, the easy definition is anything that overwhelms your ability to cope. I use that definition in my work because when we try to put trauma into 7 boxes, it doesn't represent the experience of people, okay? So, child abuse, neglect, those things are, often what we talk about. But in trauma-informed organs work and trauma-informed care movement, we're going to acknowledge the experiences of systemic oppression, right? So experiences of racism, ageism, ableism, heterosexism, those things create toxic stress. Therefore, those things can be traumatic. So you want to make sure we're including that in our definition or looking at your intake forms to know when those things aren't being included and how do you bring that to the table, okay? We believe in the collective historical and generational impacts of trauma, right? So we're going to pay attention to that, and that's important because, again, I want you to be trying to help me think about this intersection of care coordination, cultural responsivity, equity work, and trauma-informed care. So as you think about this, we talk about this about trauma all the time, trauma are these things, but how are these things then related to those other things? Again, really important that trauma-informed care is that system change work, policy and practices. So here's a question I've been playing with agencies and organizations. What are the policies and procedures that you have in place that support, encourage interpersonal relationships in your work? Because it's all about relationship, right? Healing work is all about relationship. And you think about, are there policies and procedures that are a barrier to creating relationship? And so think about, again, so we're kind of thinking about the relationship component, but we're going to take it up to a policy level or procedural level. Again, trauma-specific services or interventions we do with individuals, families, and groups who have experienced trauma. White dominant society, they come with acronyms and certifications, right? There are plenty of traditional cultural healing methodologies that are excellent and effective for helping individuals, families, and groups. So why is this stuff so important? And again, many of you have heard this, but I can't not always say it, is we're really focused on those last 3. But again, those of you who've heard this before, think about this differently now. Think about it from the sense of cultural responsivity and care coordination. Is that, first of all, we know that trauma differentially affects us, right? If we all experience the same incident, we're going to experience it differently, right? We also strongly believe that trauma affects how people approach service, right? So we look at trauma-informed care as an engagement tool. It's an engagement tool. It helps you get people, for both those you serve, but also for the workforce, right? Because we believe that experiencing adversity and trauma impacts how you approach our services because of that last bullet. It's been our services that have caused harm in people's lives. So they're not willing to come to our location, to our service, to a person with a badge, to the car with the label because of the history of those experiences. So I think now we start to see these things come together a little bit, right? The experiences of structural violence, systemic racism, leads to experiences of trauma and the inability to engage because of fear of harm from the system. And then your job is to coordinate lots of systems who have done lots of harm. Good luck with that. So I want to stop and give you this graph. And this is something we did several years ago. And I pulled it back out recently. I was like, oh, that was kind of cool. So I want to introduce it to you, again, as you play with this stuff today and kind of throughout your work. So the idea here is there's the experiences of toxic stress and trauma. for both those who are seeking services and the workforce. Now, those experiences then lead us to this thing called perceptual expectancy and selective attention. Now, these are just concepts that mean this. We respond to what's in front of us based on our past history with what's in front of us. We perceive something to happen because of our past experiences of that experience, right? So if you go to the dentist, you're going to perceive that the thing is going to happen that's already happened to you in the past, right? Is that making some sense? You walked into this building and you thought, when's the last time I've been to this building or a place like this? Or was the last conference you went to, was it fabulous? Was it not fabulous? You got ready based on your database of experience. Does that make sense? It's 8:30-ish. I get it, okay. So perception then leads us to what's called this attention, the selective attention. So then we pay attention to that thing that we're going to perceive to happen. So what this means is if we are ready for bad things to happen, then we're watching for that thing. We get that tunnel vision going, right? If I'm expecting you to say no to me, because every time I've asked the system for help, the system has said no to me, then I'm walking into you ready for the no. Like seriously ready for the no. I'm going to get ready. Those of you who have heard me talk know that I have this issue with my mobile carrier and cable carrier sometimes. So you get ready to fight the fight. And if the fight's not there, you're like, what? Right? I expected you to not give me what I needed, right? And so I got ready for it. I exerted energy into it. And so what you're going to always be working on is working away from that, repairing that, called a corrective emotional experience in the clinical world, right? So think about this for a second. So perception, your past experience and knowledge influences how you perceive things are going to be. Perceptual harm from the system is what we're sitting in right now in my work. That in combination to now you're kind of hyperly focused on some stuff leads to, and then you put that plus the environment you're in leads to certain behaviors. The issue here though, folks, is the systems focus on the behaviors. We only see people in those behaviors that you just talked about around your table. We tend not to back those behaviors up into where did they come from? Why are they present right now, today? And could any of that be because of who I represent, who I am, my identities, my space, my office, my service, my system? Make sense? So I want you to kind of play with this. Again, start to look at this and go, where is culture in this? Right? Where is culture in this? Where is trauma in this? And then what does any of this have to do with your work? Now, these are the principles of trauma-informed care. A lot of you have seen these if you've done any trauma-informed care work. So I want you to now look at them through this lens of intersection of equity, cultural responsivity, and care coordination, right? So we have these 6 key principles: safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, voice and choice, and then 6. I think Samson got a little tired, right? Because number 6 says what? Culture, historical, and gender issues. Wrap that up in a principle. So we need to dissect that. We need to pull that out. That's like 10 principles that need to be added, right? And we're working on that. That's what we need. That's the work we need to do. So the 10 implementation domains, you see in these domains cross-sector collaboration. So again, what I want you to sit with, and we're going to try to get to, is how does trauma-informed care, to what extent does it help you with cross-system collaboration? One of the questions in a cross-system collaboration project I work on that we ask people, because the issue was, do independent agencies need to go get trauma-informed? Or do we do it as a cross-system team? Does everybody go do their thing, and that way, therefore, this will work? Or do we do this as this, and then you do your own work as you do your own work, right? Now, one of the things that we did it all together, right, because it's always messy. But one of the questions that we started asking is, what policies and procedures does my organization hold that prevents your organization from being trauma-informed? And we asked that around the cross-collaboration team. So what policies or procedures is my organization require of you that's preventing you from doing trauma-informed care with those you serve? Is it the release of information form? Is it the requirement of some eligibility requirement? Is it needing to go 4 times instead of 2 times? So really getting honest about that, and maybe you can't change it, But at least we start to acknowledge not only what folks who are trying to deal with that cross-system coordination are dealing with, but we're like, hey, I'm owning that our organization is putting some barriers in play here for other organizations. Because trauma-informed care is lovely if you're super trauma-informed, but if you then send people to an entity that's not trauma-informed or not able to kind of engage in that conversation, then we end up in that whole thing again. Right? So the idea is that we all have to have some foundational knowledge and common language so that we can start to have this conversation back and forth, especially as we're coordinating care. Now, the impact of trauma, remember, is on kind of 4 bodies of knowledge we play with. I'm not going to go through these today. I'm going to sit with one. But the neuroscience is what we use, so that you need to know something about neurobiology, epigenetics, adverse childhood experience, and resiliency. So that's kind of the knowledge base that propels trauma-informed care forward. And this is important because trauma-informed care isn't just like, let's do nice work. It's grounded in the impact of toxic stress and trauma on our ability to kind of function. And knowing that, how do you do things differently, right? It's why we're going to ask healthcare professionals to audio tape the kind of the visit they have with somebody, because in the moment, you're likely not to remember what's going on because your frontal lobe is not engaged, right? We're going to have physicians, we're going to ask physicians to ask, what questions do you have about the visit, not did you have any questions? Because did you have any questions, it's like, well, I guess no, right? Like, what are your concerns? I can go, oh, well, actually, I do have some, right? So we're going to be thinking about that, using our knowledge about neuroscience to think about how to do things a little differently, right? But I kind of wanted to sit with the ACE study for a second, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And those of you who know me know I rarely talk about the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. But when I thought about you all and the work of care coordination and this intersectionality, the ACE study kind of kept popping up in my brain. And the reason, so let's kind of think about this. I'll throw it out there again. You're playing with it, and we'll see if we come out the other end somewhere. But how many have heard that Adverse Childhood Experience Study? Okay, so the really take-home message was that adversity in childhood impacts your adult health. You didn't know that, did you? Research. We like to prove what practitioners have been telling us for a long time. So again, I want you to start to see yourself in this pyramid. Like, where do you do the work? The pyramid, the original pyramid, said adversity happens in childhood. That leads to disrupted neurodevelopment. That leads to social, emotional, cognitive impairment. That leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors. That leads to disease, disability, and social problems. That leads to early death. Good morning. It's a pyramid, not a rectangle, because why? What does that tell us? Is not everyone's moving up the pyramid that way, right? Resiliency, your services, those things help, right? And that's a big, important message. But what's always been kind of challenging, so care coordination, can you see care coordination in this pyramid? Do you see the need for care coordination in this pyramid, right? Because oftentimes a lot of you are in the top part of the pyramid. I do most of my work under the disease, disability, and social problem area. But oftentimes I'm not taking my work and reconnecting it to the experiences of adversity. Now, where the ACE study needed some modification was the one that the RISE study did. So this was youth-led organization, got together, read the ACE study, and said, not complete. So what they added, and this is that intersection stuff where it gets cool, what they added was what causes adversity, right? What causes adversity? And often what causes adversity are experiences of systemic oppression and structural violence, right? So racism, ageism, sexism, those are the things leading to adversity as a result of then poverty and homelessness, lack of medical care, food insecurity. So the youth kind of gave us that at the bottom, said, hey, you got to start down here with the root causes, and then we work our way up. So then we start to see that in order to do, and this is really important because I know a lot of you know trauma-informed care, so I need you to help me do this every time someone says it, is that to do trauma-informed care is to address those things. Did you hear that? To do trauma, you cannot be doing trauma-informed care if you're not also dismantling systems that are oppressing people and not allowing access to services. And that's kind of not always seen that way, okay? So we want to make sure that we're talking about that. I'm timing myself in the mess to see where we come out of this. All right, so here's kind of the theory piece, right? So here's the why. It's because of how we understand our brain develops and functions in stress, and because we understand with epigenetics how that can be transferred throughout populations, and how we understand that adversity impacts our health and our well-being, and how we understand that resiliency can repair and restore. It's because of those things that then we strive for things like safety, transparency, trustworthiness. And this is important because transparency is important for everybody. Does everybody here want to know about yourself? Do you want to know what other people know about you? Do you want to have access to your health records, to information about you, right? Most of us would say yes to that. But if you've experienced a system that has harmed you all your life, you most likely want that even more and differently, right? Because every time someone didn't tell you something, something bad happened. So transparency takes on an even kind of a different role based on your experience with the system. Now, I want to just kind of sit. So now you've got trauma-informed care down. So now I want to sit with the intersections and integration of this. And again, this is the messy part to start to think about. So the question, right? So this is what I want to give you this language, and I'm hoping it'll catch on across the state of Oregon, actually everywhere. Is it especially as we're writing policies around trauma-informed care, and we're Intersect. Healthcare is kind of coming. Healthcare is here. Like, okay, how do I be trauma-informed, Mandy? How do I get that trauma-informed? And I'm like, it's not a noun. So don't want you to hear me. It's not a noun. Right? I think it's an adjective. It describes how you do services. Some people want to call it a verb. I didn't do so well in grammar growing up, so I don't really care what you call it. Except it's not a noun. You don't go get trauma-informed, right? You need to have housing and medical care and food, and you need access to those things, and those things need to be done in a trauma-informed way. And more importantly, they need to be done in a trauma-informed, culturally responsive, equitable way. Does that make some sense? Because I really want you to leave here today, and every time someone says, like, let's get trauma-informed, you can go, huh? I don't know what that means. Ask them, what do you mean by that, right? Because we are distracting and divesting in order to do this trauma-informed thing that actually is often you're already doing, right? You're often already doing. The practice part, we know what works for folks. Actually, let me change that. Folks know what works for folks, right? We just need to get the system out of the way or figure out what role the system has to allow people to access what they need to heal and recover. All right. So again, it's not new. So then the question is, if trauma-informed care is not new and it's an adjective, then how does it intersect with care coordination? What does it mean to have trauma-informed care coordination? Right? What does it mean to have, equity infused in care coordination? What does it mean to have trauma-informed and equity kind of be together as we look at services such as care coordination? So, how many people have heard of person-centered planning? So this was done by Becky Child for Traumainformed Oregon. And so I wanted to show this to you because I want us to see these intersections, because this stuff is can feel chaotic, right? And it's messy and it's complex, but one of the things I do the most, which I think you all actually are really good at doing, is helping people see the connections, right? It's helping see the connections so everybody just takes a deep breath and go, oh, we're doing that. We got that. And you all in this room, I can't imagine you can do your work successfully if you're not trauma-informed. You may not call it that. You may call it person-centered planning. Right? So if you look at this kind of cross-section here of creating a process, so person-centered planning principles mapped onto trauma-informed care principles. The individual is involved in all aspects of the plan to ensure safety. Trauma-informed care, we need physical and emotional safety. Transparency is encouraged with the goal of relationship building focused on trust. Trauma-informed care, decisions are transparent in order to build relationships based on trust. So again, I'm not going to read all these to you, but I want you to see those intersections and like the kind of approaches you may already have and how they sync up together, so that you don't say, oh, this is this other thing that they want me to do called trauma-informed care. Blah. You be like, oh, look, we got this, because we're doing really well around person-centered planning. What trauma-informed care might bring to person-centered planning is the explanation from a neuroscience perspective about why those things are important. Like why they work the way they work. A teacher shaking hands of every student coming into the classroom, the teacher's like, I do it because it feels good and it helps my day. We can now say it helps develop neurotransmitters and blah, 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 and relationship and regulation. So the trauma-informed care is just adding the why. Does that make some sense? Because people have already known it's been, you wouldn't necessarily keep doing things if they didn't work, would you? Individually, we won't go systems organizations yet, right? Individually. All right. So how does trauma-informed care help care coordination? That's kind of the question on the table, right? Like, to what extent, what can you take from trauma-informed care? And I feel like there should be trauma-informed care glitter. Like, what can you glitter onto what you're already doing to see if it matches up to trauma-informed care? And here are some of the things I think about. And again, this is like me go, blah. So see if any of this matches you. So I think trauma-informed care can help you explain behaviors. Why isn't that person showing up, complying, doing what I say, et cetera? You may be able to use some of the trauma-informed care knowledge base to help explain, and this is when those of you who've worked with me, we do these trauma education statements, right? Hi, physician. Oftentimes people show up late to appointments because of their experience of being harmed by the system. They want to case out the place and check it out before they come in, right? We're trying. I'm fascinated to share with this because it's just happened yesterday, and I want your expertise on things. But we've been trying to figure out how to measure trauma-informed care. How do you know you're doing it? And so we keep wanting to do, like, I want an app that every time somebody leaves a provider experience, they can like push a button. Have you ever been in the airport? You come out of the bathroom and it has like a smiley face and a not smiley face, and you're supposed to push the button. I think Seattle has them. I want like that, like after every event. Did you feel safe? Did you feel heard? Do you feel like the organization has your back? Push a button, done. Not that simple, right? It's not that simple. And because what does safety mean for you is different for me, et cetera. So one of the interesting things we were talking about just yesterday was, what about if we measure the absence of something? This is something for you to think about. Ask the folks you work, ask yourselves, if you've experienced trauma in your life, either from the system and or from kind of people in your life, what is it that you do as you get ready for an appointment? Do you worry? Like, could I measure that you didn't worry about whether they were going to ask you about that part of your life? Could I ask you that you didn't stay up all night with anxiety in your belly because you were worried someone was going to kind of put their hands on you in a way you didn't want them to, but you didn't feel like you would be able to say no, and so you didn't know what to do, and now you're not going to show up? Did you worry about who you could take with you to help translate information for you there? And would the physician or provider or whoever it is you're seeing be upset that you were going to bring that person in? Is that making sense? Like the absence of, like, and so I think we forget about all of the work people do just to try to survive us. That's behind the scenes, right? It's the night before, it's the 2 days before. I had a woman I worked with years ago who, before every appointment, she would go and like be around the place at least 3 times before she showed up for the appointment. She would case out the place, look at it, where am I going in, how am I going in, who's there, where do I sit, where's the lobby, right? That's a lot of energy being exerted. And so it may be, if we're doing really good work that happens to be trauma-informed and culturally responsive, those things won't be as present. The absence of the pre-visit. I don't know. We'll see. Think about it. So I think it helps explain behaviors. Trauma education statements are something we should always be doing, right? So I wonder if this person is not doing what you think they need to do because of, and you give some explanation related to. A lot of times people struggle when we show up in our cars with labels on them because these cars with labels on them have often caused harm in this community. That's a trauma education statement, right? Explaining away behavior based on these other things. So I think it can help with communication, right? How can we, what skill sets can trauma offer some skill sets in communicating, not just with those we serve, but more importantly with each other? Does anybody in this room experience toxic stress as a result of their job? Do you know that experience makes it so that you don't communicate always so well, right? I've just entered the sandwich generation, and I was recently dealing with some care coordination of a family member. And I was like, I came to my staff and I was like, you're just gonna have to be my frontal lobe for today, because I'm not there. I got too many other things going on. And my staff was like, right on, we got that. And they just went into play, right? That's using neuroscience to help me communicate better with the folks or my peers. So thinking about, I think that can be helpful. I think it explains why the practices work, right? Why is it important to offer someone some food and water prior to a visit? I want to start cortisol swabbing or heart rate testing people pre and post, and then I want to do it to you. People are starting to do this. There's a school in the country that actually does little finger things about heart rate to students, and if the heart rate is too high, they don't give the student the test. Ugh. I mean, neuroscience tells us you're not going to do well on the test if your heart rate is at a certain point, right? Think about you might here go to court. You might do any work in court, right? I used to do a lot of work in court. I mean, I was like, thump, 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 right? And I mean, I was not making clear statements. I was trying to advocate, but I'm not sure what I'd said at the time, right? So what if we actually talked about biometrics for our own stress levels and then decision-making attached to that? So if your heart rate is up here, that's okay. Like, we're not going to, that happens in our work. But maybe don't make a major decision about someone's access to services when you're in that state. Okay. Provides common language. Again, provides common language. And we say this all the time, but it's important. It's helpful when you're like, hey, I wonder if toxic stress is happening, and then people know what that means, because it allows you to kind of go to a place that takes it off of blaming people with some other language. So again, I think common language is important. I think it keeps core issues at the core. We know that health issues are related to trauma and adversity, but we're treating the health issue, which is fine. We need to. If you're suffering from diabetes, you need care around your diabetes. But if we're then ignoring the stress that's messing with your sugar levels, then we're not going to get anywhere, right? So I think trauma-informed care can help keep those core issues on the table. I think trauma-informed care helps us focus and regulate ourselves, but also the chaos in organizations and systems. And this is where I started to get like, whoa! Like, I wanted to sit down with you all. I'm like, let's talk about this forever. There's something about doing trauma work with survivors that what you learn is you have to, trauma work is really about regulation. It's teaching people how to regulate and kind of walk in the world in a way that they can kind of be present. And we talk about that with individuals and with families dealing with crisis and trauma and disaster and et cetera, but we need it too, right? Because would you agree that we're working in chaotic, dysregulated systems? So like think about we need to use those clinical skills on ourselves. Like, how do you stay regulated in the chaos? And I think the kind of neuroscience helps you understand why that's so important, if we're going to be able to shift those systems at all whatsoever. I think it also explains why things are not working. I want us to start asking, when is it not working? Why is it not working? We want to go to do this, evidence-based practice works here. It's great, but no one talks about when it doesn't work. And that's not a bad place to go. When it's not working, why is it not working? And could trauma-informed care, neuroscience, toxic stress, explain any of that for us? It's not working. Yes, A plus B equals whatever, but not when you wrap it around stress and trauma and perceived trauma from the system. Yes, that intervention is definitely going to make that difference, but the person is not showing up to get the intervention to make the difference, then it's not working. So I think it helps us refocus that. And I think it hopefully helps us relate better. We need to be predictable. Trauma-informed care is about being predictable and consistent. That's what you're aiming for, so people know what to expect, because when you know what to expect, you're less likely to get dysregulated, right? So telling people what to expect. The other big mantra of trauma-informed care, which is really fun, is to be consistent but flexible, which is kind of like the title of your conference. Right? Being consistent but flexible. Consistency is important for regulation. You want to know when you show up, these are the questions that will be asked, and this is how they'll be asked, and this is who's going to ask them, and this is your right not to ask them, but you may have to not have that happen the same way for everybody. So consistency, but then be able to figure out that flexibility around that. Now, this is a picture of an organization that is not trauma-informed, but is organized around trauma. So I want you just to think, and again, throwing stuff out. So think about this. This is based on Sandy Bloom's work, mixed in with Bob Doppelt's work, who does work around climate change, disaster, and trauma, and the fact that we need to get behavioral health involved in that industry, and we're doing some intersection there. But the idea that when your organization is organized around trauma and toxic stress, you have issues like lack of good emotional management. Again, organizationally. Think organizationally. You have top-down authoritarian leadership and poor communication. Rigid and often punitive rules. Now think about this. Rigid and often punitive rules. And you should be thinking, what does this have to do with trauma and stress and toxic stress? When you get really stressed out, how many of you in this room clean your house versus deal with the stress point? I know not everybody, so okay. Oftentimes, when we're at a place of complete dysregulation, when we just don't feel like we know where we're headed, we start making rules. They make sense. When I'm completely out of space of I'm going to come home and I'm going to tell my kids, we're cleaning the house tonight. And they're going to be like, why? I'm like, just get it done. I need your room to be clean. Because if your room is clean, then somehow whatever's causing me stress is going to go away. Not going to happen. So think about that. So, because I want you to attach to whether that happens for you, because it also happens in our organizations. And our organizations are under a lot of stress. Would you agree? You know, scarcity is a real thing that our organizations start to function in, and then we start to create these rules. So I'll go to agencies, I'm like, why do you have that policy? And they'll be like, I don't know. Or because in 1995 there was this thing that happened. I'm like, but it's 2018, and that person's not here anymore, right? So you want to start to think about inability to grieve tragedy and losses, leading to a cycle of reenactment. Organizationally, grief. Can we do that in organizations, right? A lack of empathy, compassion, trust, and social support. Constant group thinking causing inability to learn, right, or correct mistakes. I think, personally, that this is our biggest issue. I think if we're going to do true work around equity, we have to be able to talk about repair and restoration, right? But we have to have the ability to do that. And if we're functioning under trauma, kind of an organizational under trauma brain is going to make that hard to do. Now, I want to then shift now to specifically to trauma-informed care and equity work. For me, it's racial equity work is where I ground that, cultural responsivity, inclusivity. So I want to talk about that, and then we'll try to wrap this up somehow. So are they related? Trauma-informed care and equity work, are they related? And the answer is absolutely. Now, I want to tell you that trauma-informed care movement needs to recenter its work around equity. The trauma-informed care movement is grounded in dominant understandings of what trauma is. If you look at the trauma-informed care movement of who is talking about it, I think you'll get a clear picture of this, right? So how are these things related? And this is where we're really launching into this work right now, and so you can look at what we're trying to do around this. But so first of all, much trauma in our society and adversity in our society is the result of systemic oppression. So it's the root cause of these things. It's also, people are experiencing adversity, trauma, and stress because they're denied access to services because of an identity they hold. Okay, so two ways in which kind of trauma and those things happen. What's really interesting, and this is one of those things like if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, go to your happy place, have your coffee. But this is one of the things I was thinking about the other night is that when we talk about clinical work in trauma, again, we talk about working with people to come up with a coherent narrative. Has anybody ever heard that phrase? Coherent narrative. It's something we learn in clinical work, which is like you need to come up with a kind of story that works for you about your trauma. Because if it's too fragmented, you're trying to figure it out. So at some point you have to figure out your coherent narrative, and you get to do that with the help of others around you, and et cetera. So I was thinking about this. Okay, well, if we believe that people need coherent narrative, then that means systemically we need coherent narratives. But in order to get to coherent narratives, systems have to talk about the harm that they've done, right? Because we can't say like, "Come on in." I mean, what is one of the jokes you probably know better? It's the joke like, "Here comes, hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help." It's like not, it's like the worst thing to say, right? So I want us to start to think about to what extent is your organization, is your system, are you kind of talking about that, right, in a real way that allows people to better engage and to build trust within systems. Now, are trauma-informed care and equity, and again, racial equity is where I'm sitting this work, are they interchangeable? And my answer today is no. I think you can do trauma-informed care work and get away with not doing equitable work or not be addressing equity. So I think the trauma-informed care movement needs to make this very explicit. How are you doing this work and how are you engaging in this work as you're doing your trauma-informed care work? I think if you're doing successful equity work, it's real hard to think that's not also trauma-informed. It might be, but I mean, it's a harder thing. And you want to think about this, is doing good care coordination work just automatically trauma-informed? I don't know. That's a question I'd want you to think. Because what I want us to do is stop saying these are things like this, but like, hey, if you're doing this here, add a little bit of this. Right? And that makes it trauma-informed. All right. So I want to just throw out the culture piece because I think it gets lost as we talk. It's lost, but we talk about equity and inclusivity and cultural responsiveness and these words. But I want to talk, when we talk about trauma and we talk about healing and we talk about wellness, we need to understand that culture, right, is a tool for wellness and healing. So I was recently asked at a workshop a couple weeks ago kind of why I do this work. And I was like, I do this work because I have... a couple things. I do this work because I believe that, again, I've learned by working with people that people know what they need, but the system kept getting in the way of. And I did a lot of work around grief and loss in the immigration and migration population years ago. And what I found was grief was being stunted because people simply didn't have access to the things their culture used to grieve. So I come from North Carolina. When someone passes away, the first thing you do is start making casseroles and polishing silver. You will walk into a house and people will be gathering and eating and polishing silver. And the food is very particular. Okay? Now, if you don't have access to those things, if you don't have access to go out in the streets and have a dance, or to sing a song, or to wail, or to have that food available to you in that process gets stunted. And so I kind of want us to start thinking about this in the sense of trauma and healing and well-being. Is the system allowing access, not just access to the healthcare system, but access to health and the things needed within that culture and that population that helps encourage healing? All right, so what I want to do, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to show you a video. Is Carolyn Anderson in the room? Okay. I'm going to show you a video Carolyn did for us, which is brilliant. That kind of, I think, pulls it together nicely. But I want you to think about these dots. So successful care coordination, I suspect, requires the critical ingredient that is not reimbursable and should be, which is developing relationship. Would you agree with that? That most of your job is developing relationship with individuals and with systems, right? In order to build relationship and connection, one has to understand how past experiences are going to impede or hinder this. So in order to build a relationship with you, I need to understand how our histories might make that challenging or not challenging, right? And it also helps me, I need to know how to repair and restore so the connections can happen. And to find healing, one needs to access their culture. So how do we kind of mush all this together? So I'm going to show you this video from Carolyn, who's going to talk about her experience, about why trauma-informed care is important. And so be thinking what she's talking about, 5 minutes long. Be thinking what Carolyn is talking, because this is the best teacher you got. She's the best teacher we have about putting all this together, care coordination, equity, and trauma all together.
I came from a background that was, sort of traumatic from anyone. I don't know if people have heard of the adverse childhood experience. Well, I've had several adverse childhood experiences, from, my mother dying early on and my not being able to trust adults or trust authority very well. And so I question everything. I mean, when someone says they need to know, I need to know as much as they need to know as to why they're doing something. So I guess as a result of that, I've just developed certain patterns in maybe the way I behave. A lot of people don't like for you to ask them a lot of questions, especially when they are authority figures. I had an experience years ago where I was hit in the face and I had to have surgery. And that whole process was very, it was just a grueling process. And as a response to that traumatic experience, when I go to the dentist, my body tenses up and it's really difficult for me. I know that I'm at the dentist intellectually. I know I'm at the dentist. I know the dentist is not going to try to harm me. But the body knows, and the body responds, and then I had the panic attack, and my hand might just fly off and, just say like, look, stop. Okay, and I have to breathe. Okay, it would be helpful if the dentist, having known my story, can just show a little compassion toward me by like saying something like, would you like a minute to breathe? Or is there anything I could do? But no, that doesn't usually happen. This one particular time I'm thinking of when they said, well, we're going to have to cancel your appointment. And maybe you need to seek a professional. Okay, so that sort of had me, wired up. And then I'm like talking to the dentist, and I'm like, no, I'm trying to explain. And the dentist wouldn't listen. And then it turns out that it became, well, we're going to need you to leave. And then the one time I had the police officer called on me because they thought I was becoming hostile when I'm only trying to explain something. So what I needed them to do was to listen. And that was like a traumatic experience. One problem is that I find that a number of professionals or clinicians might do is they pathologize. Everything has to be bad or an illness or a sickness. So why can't we just accept people the way they are, with everything they bring to the table, and expect, give them tools, give me tools, to help me recover from whatever that is that has held me back in life, so I can move forward, so I can be a more productive citizen, so that I can have something to offer to a community. It matters that I have a voice. It matters that I have a choice. And it matters that I am able to collaborate with people, not just feel like I'm the one that's just seeking help and powerless. So being trauma-informed is empowering, not disempowering.
Can you see in Carolyn's story the intersection or the integration or the connection between cultural responsive, trauma-informed care and care coordination? Can you see, so I want you to what did she say, right? You could just say, do you need a minute to breathe? So this is what's always so fascinating to me about trauma-informed care is interventions in trauma-informed care are usually not rocket science. Would you like a minute to breathe? But for some reason, systemically, they can be hard to do. And that's an important thing for us to sit with. Why are they hard to do, right? And that's kind of bigger stuff that we'll keep talking about. All right. Now, this is a logic model trauma-informed care, and that's like a bummer after watching Carolyn to say logic model. But the only thing I want to point out to you, because this is one of the few logic models of trauma-informed care that's out there in the world. But what I want you to see in this is that what you need, right, is some competence and commitment and all these great things. What I want you to pay attention to is what we do. So you change policy and practice, you change your environment to be welcoming and inclusive, but that last thing says personal interaction. And the more that trauma-informed care is evolving, I think we've actually kind of left that one behind. I think we've been really, which has been great. We're an evolving movement. We are learning. We are in the middle of this stuff. But I think we've gotten really excited about changing the environment and the intake forms. But then now we need to go back and be like, yeah, but how are we doing in the interpersonal relationship department, right? Are our staff well enough to be able to sit in kind of chaos in a way, in a trauma-informed way? So I just want to put that out there, which is why we're kind of doing some of that work and trying to figure that out. But when we measure trauma-informed care, we want to measure that third thing, which is what will happen, which is people will feel safe, empowered, valued, cared for, believe the organization has their back, and they trust the organization, staff, and leadership. That's what we want to measure, is the experience. Don't know yet how. We want to measure experience. And then the idea, right, is if you do all that, then you get engagement. And again, staff engagement, service user engagement, and then that leads to great wellness, health all down the line. But I really want you to help me, help industries and systems and organizations hold the fact that it's the client experience that's really important. Your lobby is a wreck. People may not show up the first time, or they'll show up and be like, I'm out. It's too chaotic and too noisy. But if you have a relationship with someone, they'll work through that to get to the relationship. If you have a beautiful, lovely lobby that is welcoming and has great music and it's like perfect, but the relationships aren't there, forget it, right? And so I just want us to help kind of bring back into the trauma-informed care kind of work the interpersonal part, which is about healing, which is kind of the whole core. So as I wrap up this like whole, I don't know, that you get to deal with as you welcome to my brain, is that if I was a better graphics person, these would be flying all around, but it's not what I got my degree in. But I think this is the work that we're doing right now. It's equity work, resilience work, and trauma-informed care work. And some of you have heard me say this. My concern in the trauma-informed care, in our world, is that we jump things really quickly, right? Let's go to that next thing. Let's do that shiny light, because that shiny light will make all this go away. And I think it's actually well-intended. I mean, I think it's kind of out of a need to make things better. But what's happened is we're leaving the equity work, racial equity work, for trauma-informed care work, because talking about racism is hard. And now we're jumping the trauma-informed care train to the resiliency train, because resiliency is really nice and smiley, and it feels hopeful. And so I just want to, again, I'm throwing all this at you because you all are steeped in this work. You know this, but I want to kind of validate that for you, that I hope that you can, what we need is all three, right? Neither of these stand on their own to get to successful, and I would argue that these three intersected get to successful care coordination, right? The care coordination is about the intersection of, access, cultural responsivity, about promoting resilience, and about understanding the impact of those things on the people we serve, which is the trauma piece of that. So here's kind of this, kind of takeaway message. It's like, what if, and I'm playing with these questions, is like, what if your organization, and you ask at every new policy, procedure, or question you have, that you go through these questions. For those served and our workforce, to what extent does this policy or procedure create a sense of safety? Does it honor transparency and choice? Does it value the importance of relationship? Like, think about that new policy, and is it going to hinder a relationship, right? What about institutional responsibility? Does it hold that? Does it offer a sense of welcoming? Does it promote inclusivity, considering the creation, perpetuation, activation of structural oppression? And does it believe in partnership by not perpetuating power imbalances where they shouldn't exist? And finally, does it include the voice of those who it's going to impact? I'm actually wanting organizations to have trauma-informed ethics boards so that every question goes through a group that kind of asks these questions to the new policy. Should we close the office at Fridays at 3? I don't know. Let's ask these questions that allow us to intersect trauma and cultural responsive, cultural humility work together to try to work through that. So I leave with this idea with you that I want, and again, blah, blah, so keep me accountable, keep talking to me over the time and your work, that I think a couple of things. I think what's really important for me is that you help me keep it complex. I was sitting late last night, because this is what I do, and I was like, maybe complexity is kind of chaos organized. You have chaos to coordination, but what I want us is to keep things complex. We as a society and as a people and as a species are going to make things simple. That's what we do, because I'm like, hey, I want to deal with that part. Right? But it's not about that, and that's always going to get us down a path that doesn't feel successful, and I think actually makes us feel more burdened. Because we're like, well, I'm doing this, but nothing's changing. And it's because you're only seeing that thing. You may only need to do that thing, but you need to see yourself as part of the other 15 things. You have to be addressing resiliency and equity and trauma-informed care, and you have to find a way to see that. I want us to honor the messiness of all of that. There's no do this and then that happens in the world of trauma-informed care. I'd argue in the world of a lot of these things we're talking about. That history matters. We've got to bring that back to the table about the experiences of a people and of an agency and of an organization and of a service system. That repair is possible. And I was thinking about this, like here's your keynote address. Go make all these things happen. And then I thought, if there's anybody who can do it, it's those of you in this room. And I really believe, you can't do care coordination and not be able to do this work. There are a lot of industries where this would be like, what? But you handle complexity and mess every day. And so then the key is, how do you do that and stay healthy and well? What do you need to stay focused and informed through the process? So I don't come as a keynote with answers, as you might notice. But I hope that as you leave today, that you kind of will be thinking about those intersections and kind of hold each other accountable for complexity. It's not just that thing or this thing, it's all the things. And then holding that, you can still pick the one thing to work on, right? But you're holding the whole picture. So I'm going to end by sincerely and with all of like the heart I can spill out to you, seriously thank you for your navigation and for your work. Because I think it's where the system is going to change, is exactly where you sit in the work that you do. So thank you and have a great day.